we're not threatening anybody.
That's true.
We're
just
discussing the moral application of killing people.
That's fair. Hello, and welcome back to the Meek Knight of the Lily. We're your hosts again, Chris,
Ben?
Anthony?
Wiley.
And today we're going to be talking about human/healthy relationships, the part 1. So we are going to start off with just defining what is relationship.
That's an excellent question.
Yeah. Unlike usual, we don't actually have, we're not going to be, as much point. We're going to be trying to have more of a conversation this time. So
no monologues have been prepared for this particular podcast.
Yeah, so you'll tell us if you like it. Maybe it's great, maybe it's horrible. Yeah, but in terms of relationships, I think we can define relationship perhaps as something, the way two things are affiliated together?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. The affiliation between two individuals/objects.
Right. And then you can, obviously there's a difference between, in terms of, when we're talking about human beings or rational souls or, intellects with things. The Webster Dictionary was honestly not that helpful. Your dictionary was kind of better, but not that great.
Yeah, and then it said that basically a relationship is when two things are related, and then I went to the related section, and it says when things are in a relationship, so it's just sending me back.
It's a circular definition.
Yeah,
interesting. That's what secularism does for you.
For the most part, it's a good dictionary.
But I think something that might work better would be just basically take a couple of instances from categories, because you can have the human relationship with objects, such as with food. There's we have a relationship with food because we want to eat it so that it nourishes our body.
Right.
We have a relationship with our cars or with our property, where we want to take care of it because we take care of it. It in a way takes care of us because it provides us shelter, provides us means of transportation.
Right.
Then there are varying levels of relationships with people that in English we just kind of refer to as friendships for the most part.
Right.
Even though you could kind of break it into acquaintance and then the different levels of friendship, so much how C.S. Lewis talks about.
Right. And the motive of the friendship.
Yeah,
True.
the motive of the friendship.
Well, I think what's interesting about relationship, and we did take some notes, even though we don't have points, but one thing that's really interesting is we see relationship in God Himself. God Himself is relationship because of the Trinity, right? So literally in God is relationship. He's Father, Son, Holy Spirit. He is relationship of the three. And God is love. So you can really say that God is in a loving relationship, or relationship, properly speaking, in the fullest definition of a relationship between persons, which can be found as expressed in the Trinity, can be said that relationship is love. Mm-hmm. And that, I think, is pretty obvious when we're talking about individuals, human beings or between angels or whatever. That being said, man being made in God's image and likeness, supposed to be having relationships as God does. That means our relationships with others, I think, should be could be defined as proper relationships. Could be defined as love, right? Mm-hmm. Loving relationships, or we love another.
I mean, C.S. Lewis kind of touches on that with the four loves, where you have storge, philios, eros, and agape, where each of those is a level of in some way partaking in love. Where agape, obviously being the fullest, being the divine love, all the way down to storge, being something that C.S. Lewis debated about whether or not he even should include, because he's is storge really love? Because it's more of an affection towards some sort of object or thing that cannot reciprocate a true form of love, such as some people in the modern day will call pizza love and stuff like that. I love pizza, I love ice cream, I love my car. Mm-hmm. It's not capable of reciprocating, especially the pizza.
Right.
It can't reciprocate the love for you.
And I believe that's where we find fulfillment, is when we reciprocate something back. When we give love, that's where we, in a way, gain love. We gain our fulfillment.
A bit of an homage to the next episode on relationship, which will be about friendship, just hint, hint. But, I was reading a document by my beloved friend, Dominic Clark, very smart man, and his thesis, a philosophy thesis on friendship. And one thing I was reading in there that I forget who he was quoting, but it was a really, really good part. And it was talking about how in friendship, the only thing that a friend really wants out of the other friend is just to know that they love them as well. Like they love them back. Like they'll do all sorts of wonderful things for them. They'll give them stuff. They'll like sacrifice all sorts of things. This isn't a good friendship, a true friendship. But they'll do just about anything for the other. And the only thing they really want in return is just the same thing. Like
Some
love.
might call that a virtuous friendship.
A virtuous friendship, yes.
But we should probably not get into that. Otherwise,
we'll
jump
go on
the
a
gun a little
tangent,
bit.
jump the gun. Yeah, we should probably stay on this topic. But one thing. Speaking of though friendships and virtuous friendships, our friend here, Ben, who's working on a story himself, had a really cool thing in his story about relationship, and I was wondering, would you read it for us?
Sure.
Because you mentioned like you had that. And I think it'd be really
Okay.
cool.
So 2-second introduction while I pull it up. I'm trying to write a book. Keyword. About two guys, an old guy and a young man. Not sure how old. I'm very much in the work. But they both are in a bad place in their life, and then they meet each other and they grow together. The young guy learns how to listen and the wisdom of from age, and then the old guy learns community and how to be uplifted by other people. So this would be in the introduction, which is describing how important relationships with people specifically, but then it hints at something greater. So I'll just read it now. So, total reclusion is, as I firmly believe, a fate worse than death. I do not denote this lightly. I sincerely believe that the vocation of all is to find community and solace in the joy of the moment spent in forging the lasting bonds. This is not meant to say that mere interactions will suffice. A bond, while pedantic to the ear, holds much more gravitas than one might initially consider. A bond is a covenant between those for whom it is forged. This is an unbreakable union meant to tie these souls together for all eternity. Each and every human creature has this innate need for such a connection. No matter how much we deny it, it is hardwired into every fiber of our existence. It is a deep hunger at the pit of our souls. We crave in a very carnal way to grasp something so transcendently true our weak-mindedness is incapable of understanding. This whole lies at the pit of all our existence. And the motivation in that little segment was the idea of a chemical bond. I don't remember the exact, because there's like 3 different types. But the one that I had in mind was the one that you basically, once it's formed, can never be broken. And that was like the focus of the whole thing in like the metaphorical sense, but that is what we're supposed to be after in a actual sense.
I love how like even in nature, like obviously in God we see it, but then even in our matter, like in our body soul composite, we're a body soul composite, gotta love philosophy, but like in our humanity, right, in our flesh, God creates relationships that chemically, once formed, are unbreakable.
Yeah.
Like, I believe true friendship, and the saints would agree that, and we're going to get into that next episode, are unbreakable. Like, they're eternal. Like, if you have a true friendship, they're eternal. They're meant to be eternal, just like love is eternal. But I love how it's physical, too. Like, in that own, like, it's just a reflection of the truth that God has made. I don't know, I think that's so cool. I do think we should mention that there are such things. Obviously, we're talking about how relationships are love. There are bad relationships, but I wanted to point out, and that is, I wouldn't classify that as a thing of itself, like bad love. I would say that's an absence.
Like darkness is the absence of light.
Right.
Or how evil can be either a deprivation of the good, an absence of the good, or a perversion of the good.
Right.
So like a friendship of use.
Right.
Is a perversion of love, where like you are using someone and you're like considering that a friendship, where like you're twisting love and claiming instead of giving and receiving, or just a complete absence of it, like such as like cutting people off, or just being like in like an absolutely terrible situation. Like that.
In which case, we're using the same word, relationship, to describe something negative, but really, it's only relationship insofar as it is a relationship of absence. Like it's an absence, because I mean,
it's an absence of proper love.
It's an absence of proper love. Yeah, Thomas Aquinas talks about that. Like in terms of like how like you said, evil is like just the absence of goodness. The devil doesn't have his own clay, to quote a lot of people.
I like that.
That's
really
a great
like
one.
that.
But real quick, but kind of building off that and going back a little bit, I heard a very good simple analogy for like the relationship of the Trinity. Now, obviously, it's Trinity. It's an analogy. It's not perfect.
Right.
Don't crucify me. But I think it's a very apt one that helps us to kind of like visualize that relationship of love. And credit to the servants of the pierced hearts of Jesus and Mary for kind of like fleshing out this analogy and kind of bringing it to my attention too. Is you can think about the relationship between the Father, the Son, and the Spirit, from all eternity, the Father has been continuously giving of himself in love to the Son and pouring of himself out. And the Son has been in turn receiving and pouring himself out in love from all eternity to the Father. And that bond of love is the Holy Spirit. But they are so united in love that they are almost indistinguishable from each other, yet distinct.
I love that.
Now you could go into like hours upon hours of like master's level lectures on like how to like break that down further, but we don't have time for that. And I am not a master's degree like I'm not even getting a master's degree, much less in theology, much less in Trinitarian theology specifically.
Not to mention that heavily relates to the episode, the third part of this series. Not to give too much away on romantic relationships.
You keep spoiling.
I know, I'm sorry. Yeah, anyway.
But the reason I think that's important is because it's a framework for all relationships. Because, like, as the Catechism of the Catholic Church says, the desire for God is written in the human heart. Because man is created by God and for God, and God never ceases to draw man to himself. Only in God will he find the truth and happiness he never stops searching for. Because, man, like you said, man is made in the image of God. Right. And the image of God is this communion of persons where you are constantly pouring out of love to the other and receiving love from the other. So that we are constantly called to be receiving the love that God is pouring out into us, and in turn be desiring to pour out and to pursue that love in return.
100%. And then you could tie that in with the image of God, how when God creates all of creation, it is all good. Everything's good. Man's very good.
Yes.
And then there's that one little thing that he says is not good. It is not good for man to be alone. We're meant to be in that reciprocal relationship with something.
Yes.
Ultimately with God himself.
And like with that, it doesn't say just it is not good for man to be alone, for I am able to sustain him. Because yes, God is, but how did God choose to sustain man through community? God didn't choose to leave Adam alone,
right,
or to create man in isolation from other man, but only in pure communion with himself. No, the first thing he did was he brought all of the creatures to him to find a suitable companion, and he found none. Right. And one of the, like, obviously, it's not like a fully historical description, but one of the reasons I think that kind of depiction in Genesis is important is it shows, it's basically showing Adam searching through creation for a suitable partner. Looking out at everything that God has created, the rest of the created world, and not finding amongst the plants or the animals anything fulfilling, fully fulfilling, because it's all finite. And they are all just purely created, like, natural beings. So next, God puts Adam to sleep, removes the rib from his side, and creates Eve, creates woman, as that fulfillment. And from there flows the rest of community for all of the rest of history, for all of humanity.
I love how to start community. He literally pulls it out of himself, out of Adam. I mean, you cannot get any more.
It's that companion to the journey toward God.
Such a good poem. I don't know. I think it was, who was it? Father Mike Schmidt. He had this thing that would sit in his house by the TV. It said, God pulled the rib out of Adam, or I don't know the exact wording. So I'm paraphrasing. Bear with me. But he used a rib, so not the foot, so that Adam would trample over Eve, and not from his head so that she could lord the power over him, but from his side, nearest his heart, and under his arm for him to protect her and the family.
Wow.
So it's just it has
beautiful.
Such great significance. Even if physically there was no rib actually taken out of him, maybe there was.
Right.
Because God doesn't need to actually pull ribs out of people to make people. That's not the point. But it's the symbolism.
It's the analogy.
It is,
yeah. That's why it's whether it's literal or not. I mean, it's in there. So we're supposed to learn something from it.
We should find the rest of the poem for a later episode.
Yes. For a later episode.
Yeah. No more time.
No more time. Okay. Yes. But I think that covers just like how others are good in and of themselves. Because if we are good, they are good, and they are worthy of love. Obviously, they are meant to bring us closer to God, just like Adam and Eve together, in their marriage, was sanctifying and bringing them closer to God. And they together, grew to love God after the fall, and they repented. But also, others, as long as they're not dragging us down, they are good in of themselves, and it's good to be in a relationship with them, just like God had them in relation. Like, he didn't need her, as you mentioned, but they were in relation, so it's a good thing to be in a relationship.
It helps when you have a companion on that journey toward God.
It does.
It definitely does.
It does.
All the saints come in pairs of 2s and 3s.
Yes.
So many.
There's so many.
Which, speaking of saints, I think now is a great time to talk about how Saint Joseph would show us relationship. And Anthony here is like our
resident
expert on like the mystics in Saint Joseph. So I don't know if you have we were talking about it. I don't know if you have anything you want to like share right off the bat.
So I'm pulling from The Life of Saint Joseph by Maria Cecilia Baggi. She's now blessed, and she received multiple imprimaturs, even from Pope Pius X, who gave an exhortation to actually read this book. So it is an accredited source by the Church. All right, so Saint Joseph obviously is very special in his vocation. So he's called to be so close within the Holy Family, which is ultimately like the closest thing to like the Trinity on earth.
Right.
So obviously his relationship between humans, regular man, and God is going to be slightly heightened. And he obviously has a very curious way curious and very sublime way of interacting with men, and it's very focused on God. So sense, as it says here, he let's see where I can find it. Let's see. Saint Joseph lived a very retired life. He would deny his senses even the slightest satisfactions if he thought it would make him anything less pleasing to God in any way. This aesthetic activity originated in the illuminations given by God to Joseph in prayer, and for the Most High to let him know of what was expected of him if he wished to be fully pleasing to him. So he's extremely focused on God and God alone.
Kind of like a monastic vocation. Like
yes, very monastic.
Very special.
It goes through further on that he would not really talk to anybody except of anything frivolous in nature. If it didn't, like, he did not engage with that because, let's see if I can find...
While you're looking for that, that line made me think of something from the life of St. Dominic Savio.
Yeah.
Because, like, I know some people, like, especially when talking about the Holy Family, can kind of be intimidated by, like, they're, like, the closest thing to perfection on earth.
Right.
Like, how can we really live up to that? But St. Dominic Savio was just a regular boy who was brought up by St. John Bosco in his school.
Right.
Obviously, he had a family. He wasn't one of the orphans that John Bosco worked with, but he was sent to the school of John Bosco. Mm-hmm. And there's a story from his life where he would, as he's walking through town, give himself, like, he had such good control over his eyes that he would sometimes end up with headaches because he was keeping himself from looking at anything, like, impure or anything that could lead him away from God.
That's insane. Wow.
And he died at age, like, 12 or 14.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think
and
it was
his
like 14.
saying was death rather than sin.
Wow. Yeah, St. Joseph, the same thing. He wouldn't even look at anything that might even give him pleasure as a sacrifice. Anything.
Which is not
even
required,
if it was just
by
a
the way.
distraction, even just a distraction, flashing lights, he wouldn't look.
Wow.
He had such good control over his senses.
Wow.
He did everything with great joy, and while God filled him with heavenly consolation. So he often would go into ecstasy with God, and I don't know if anybody's like read stuff on like people who go into near-death experiences. Once they come back, their appreciation for the worldly things is diminished. Very much lessened because you see what really is the end goal of living. Okay, and so it says here, the people in his workshop, he was a carpenter, were never to be found engaged in frivolous talk with him, even though they might be seeking such entertainment, because the saint was an enemy of all useless chatter. He was generally considered to be a simple-minded and rather foolish person, as he was left alone and allowed to live undisturbed in his solitude, unnoticed and deserted. So he really contemplated the divine mysteries to such an extent that like St. Thomas Aquinas.
I was about to say the same thing, I just forgot his name.
Yes.
I'm like, what is his
How
name?
do people even talk about like heavenly things with less people who weren't involved with that? Because then you find it would just be an occasion for pride, and the effect would be far less. So he would pray and
So
in
what's
preparation.
interesting to me about that is like obviously he had a very special vocation, right? Because it's the church has a couple different camps on thought of Saint Joseph. One thought is that he never sinned. Everyone pretty much agrees he was like Saint Therese never committed mortal sin. Very few sins like at all. Everybody agrees he was super holy, super awesome. So he was special, right? He was special.
She says that he was the original sin was removed to him once he was like 3 months in the womb.
Wow.
Or something around.
Okay.
Like
I heard something about him, like basically with birth,
Not-
kind of being
yes.
a form of
it was like
baptism for him.
another mystic mentions around 7 months, but in any case, he not quite like the Immaculate Conception,
Right.
but something pretty close to that.
But that's not to say that like normal human relationships, like okay, for instance, our friendship, right?
Yes.
Friendship with our other host, Caleb, wherever he might be.
Who knows?
But anyways, so like those. It's not to say those relationships are bad. Obviously, I would love you to touch on briefly his friendship with the other holy people. It's in a second here, but I think it's interesting that he was called to something even more as like that monastic, but as the head of the Holy Family in that direct relationship with God. So like he was called to give up something that is good, right? Something that is actually actually good. That normal human as much as we generally spend time in human relationship and it like I think there's things we can take from that.
Yes.
Like that frivolity.
I think building off that, one of the key things that you see from that like particular passage about Saint Joseph is how fully he was committed to living out his vocation.
Yeah.
Like you're saying, he had a very special vocation,
Right.
and to kind of bring it to a more a more relatable like perspective of that, I'm actually going to go back to Dominic Safin because it just kind of came to me.
It works.
He was asked by Saint John Bosco one time, like he was out in the field playing, I think it was soccer with like some of the guys or some version of soccer, and he was asked, if an angel were to appear to you and say you were going to die in an hour, what would you do? And his response was, I would keep playing this game because I believe that God is delighting in what I am doing.
Wow.
So being able to recognize your vocation, be at peace with your particular vocation in this instant.
Right.
Not necessarily your eternal vocation for someone like us where we haven't fully discerned our eternal vocations, especially in the fullest sense, even if we have a pretty good idea of where God is calling us to be.
Right.
But right now, we are called to the vocation of, like me as a student, you as a student, you as like student work, all of that stuff, work as well, and just being like the universal call to holiness, and how you are called to live out that desire for holiness and that vocation towards holiness in your particular circumstances. Like, it wouldn't be appropriate for me to spend as much time in contemplation as St. Joseph, because then I would fail my engineering classes.
Right.
But during the times that I am called to prayer and to like discuss things like that with those who are able to really enter into it and to follow the example of St. Joseph and to try and cut back on pure frivolity.
Right.
But that doesn't mean that you have... People often like associate frivolity with fun.
Right.
They're not the same thing.
No. Right.
You can have fun. You can enjoy. Like St. John Bosco says, you can sing, you can dance, you can play. As long as you don't sin, it's okay.
Right.
Nice.
Right.
So, like, however you're called to live out your vocation, that is the important part.
Which that's good. That's
And it definitely helps when you call Christ into your act.
Right.
And then that just sanctifies it.
Right.
It makes it from almost a finite act into a divine act of Christ is doing within you. So you really multiply the power of your acts when you call them in. So
And
definitely
there's
something to
so
bring
many
in.
saints who talk about. Oh, I love that so much. But and the other thing too, and just to like maybe be clear, maybe we could finish this point with this, but how he treated others. Like it's not like even though he was called in this special way in terms of relationship with others, like he was primarily focused on his relationship with God, Mary, and our Lord. Right? I don't know why that. They're all, anyway. It actually should be the other way. Anyway, but point being. Even though he was very specially called, he still treated others, his relationships with others, he still loved everyone, right? Like, am I correct in saying, like, he treated everyone
Oh yeah, he
better
loved,
than
he
everybody
loved
else?
everyone.
Right.
He loved everyone, treating with the ultimate, most respect, almost like as if he was the lowliest servant in the world. And he, almost in a certain sort of way, humbled himself down to that and thought of himself as that is just unbelievable.
Wow. Wow. And I think you had, you mentioned to me that you had something like, or whether it's how he treated others, or if you wanted to talk about his friendships or his way he talked to God. I know there was a few, and you know that.
Let's do the one on God.
Okay, yes,
Does
please.
that work?
I would love that.
So this is he prayed in a very contemplative sort of way, and he'd always be contemplating the higher things. And here's one where he's contemplating the relationship with God himself. And so here goes. O infinite and incomprehensible God, who am I that you should grant me such privileges? How can you in your incomparable majesty deign to associate yourself with me, a miserable worm, and bestow upon me such blessings? It is truly a tremendous thing for you to condescend to hold discourses with the prophets and patriarchs, but that you should deign to do the same with me, your most lowly servant, is beyond all comprehension.
Wow.
And this is just fascinating.
I think something really cool about that. I don't have the book like with me right now because it's actually up there. But that book, A Manual of Practical Devotion to Saint Joseph, he talks about the humility of Saint Joseph, especially as the head of the Holy Family, and what he was called to do as the head there. And it reminded me of a quote by, I believe it's Saint Bernard or Bernardine. It's not of Clairvaux, it's one of the other ones. I wish I could remember exactly who said it. But it's primus gradus humilitatem est obedientia prompta. Or the first grade of humility is prompt obedience.
Wow.
And how, like, take that quote and now take St. Joseph's understanding of who the person of Jesus Christ is, his Lord and Savior, and he has been placed by God as the superior of Jesus. Wow. And Jesus would obey every single order of St. Joseph promptly and without hesitation. And the humility of St. Joseph called his desires to desire to serve his son, but his obedience to the Father in the role that he was given, it was actually a greater humility for St. Joseph to accept the role as the Father and to be in control and to lead and to have under submission, which initially, like the word submission comes from to be under the same mission. So Mary and Jesus were under the same mission as St. Joseph, which was to pursue God with your whole heart, mind, and soul.
Well, that's such a great meditation.
And in that, St. Joseph was called to lead them. So even though he was like the least worthy to be the head of the Holy Family, he showed great humility by not only recognizing that, but promptly obeying every order from the Father to lead the Holy Family.
Wow, that is...
Talk about a perfect relationship situation right there. I'm sorry, like, relationship, that's just... Go ahead, sorry.
So, prompt obedience to God. So it's actually connected to both your points, the prompt obedience, and then his such a close prayer life that he had, like, these heavenly experiences. How then did he not know immediately that it was his job to protect Mary? Like, he originally, when he figured out she was pregnant, he was going to divorce her quietly so as not to disgrace her, but in a way that he's not seen as at fault. So it's better for everyone. How did he not immediately realize that? I know he had a dream.
There's a couple of theories about that, and I don't think none have been like fully declared as the official theory by the Catholic Church. One is the reverence theory, which is that he recognized his lowliness, and they weren't like fully like he and Mary hadn't been like the marriage hadn't been finalized yet. So he was like, I am not worthy to do this. Mary deserves someone better. Right. So he recognized the sanctity of Mary and the divinity of Christ, and thought, he was like, I am not worthy to be the leader. I cannot fulfill the role of protector because of the gravity of that role. So that's the reverence theory.
Right.
There's a couple other ones that I don't fully remember, so I'm not going to flesh out now for risk of saying something wrong. We can touch on that in a later episode, potentially.
Another one was to preserve the purity of Mary.
Right.
Because they weren't married and there would be a child, in order to preserve the purity of Mary, he would just have to leave.
Well, and the thing is, there are many mystics who promote the reverence theory. And
I really like that one. I've never heard
I
of it.
love that theory.
Yeah.
There are
I
many
believe
saints and
Trent
mystics.
Horn has a video talking about those different theories. I'll have to try and find it, but I'm pretty sure he does, and it's really well broken down to different theories for that.
And I don't think he ever once thought that Mary was impure. I don't think that ever crossed his mind.
Right.
It was more of something that he
Right.
could not completely understand.
Yeah, I want to say that Thomas Aquinas is in that boat too. I need to double check, but I think so. And I've also heard that he was struggling to know what to do because God intentionally hid himself for that time so that he would struggle.
Oh, okay.
So to allow him to
Just
struggle for like
grow
3
in
And
months.
Mary didn't
understanding.
explain it to him either, which
Yeah,
is
well,
very
which is-
interesting. Very interesting.
Totally so cool. Anyways, we're getting off track, but I love it so much. After we finished talking about the reference theory, which is wonderful and everything, I think we could talk about it more in another episode, but we could also talk about, because we're running low on time, how we can live like a proper understanding of relationship, specifically healthy relationships in our own lives, right? So like how that, whatever, like for us and for all
Kind
those
of how
watching.
living relationships looks
Yes.
in our life, taking what we've learned from St. Joseph,
Yes.
taking kind of what we know, talked about a little bit at the beginning about
Right.
like how God is love and the communal nature of God.
Right.
How does that really apply
Yes.
to our life?
Yes.
Kind of
Yes.
like gradations in friendship, and
Yes.
then relationships that are not just different in degree, such as the different kinds of friendship,
Right.
friendships of like pleasure, utility, virtue, but also different in kind, different in nature,
Right.
such as like familial relationships that can be different in nature, and then obviously romantic relationships that
Right.
have a whole new element, not just the elements of friendship.
Right. Which we're going to have to talk about more
Yeah.
later. But we can definitely at least touch on it because, like, I think one way to start in terms of just talking about how to live relationships in life, or is a good examination question, because we're Catholics here, is how do we treat those around us? Like, in general, like a good question to think about is how are my relationships? Do I have what we're talking about here, the St. Joseph, like, sort of love for everybody? Are my relationships a reflection of the Trinity? I mean, that's a bit of a high bar to set, but like, something like that, like,
I think the Catechism has a pretty good like quote here about like what should be the heart of our relationships, and then we can kind of flesh that out,
I
generally
like that.
speaking, and how that applies at different gradations. So here in Catechism of the Catholic Church, 1878, it says, "All men are called to the same end, God Himself. There is a certain resemblance between the unity of the divine persons and the fraternity that men are to establish among themselves in truth and love. Love of neighbor is inseparable from love of God."
wow.
And with that, you have different gradations of love, different gradations of relationships. So, like, we can start with like the friendships of like pleasure.
Right.
Like a friend that you have, like you met them at a park because you went to play pickup basketball, some pickup soccer, something like
Right.
that. And you just see them there once a week, couple of times a week, couple of weeks in a row, something like that. There's nothing wrong with that. That is not
Right.
a frivolous friendship per se.
Right.
Because provided that it is within your vocation, you are not neglecting more important things,
Right.
that kind of recreation is something that is good.
Right.
And if you bring like true love, like agape love and that desire for the good of all men, and you through your examples, like through your life and the way you interact with these other people,
And
show
some-
forth that love,
Right.
it is even in a almost silent form of evangelization where people can
Right.
see that like in through your reaction, through your interactions with them, that kind
Right.
of
It's very
love.
natural.
It's very,
Very
natural, and it is a way to just show love to all you meet.
And
We would
I-
classify it as
yes.
like a friendship of like pleasure because you're getting together to do something that you enjoy,
Right.
but not with the intent of going deeper.
Right. Although I think that as Catholics we can actually, and I think Father mentioned this in a homily the other day, that there is a tendency as Catholics where we just live by example. But like we could stand to talk a little bit more
Oh,
about
yes.
our. I think like that would be great too, but for like evangelizing. That's a bit of a side note, but like just in terms of those relationships of pleasure, not necessarily a bad idea, you know.
Yeah, we could probably talk about that at a later date.
At a later time.
But we
yeah.
can move from now friendships of pleasure to friendships, we would call them friendships of utility, as they're classically termed.
Yeah.
Like, you have a friend at work who, like, you two work really well together, so you kind of do that together. Maybe, like, carpooling situations like that. Someone you're getting to know a little bit better, you're spending a little more
Right.
time with them. Not just, like, kind of for pleasure, but you're specifically doing things such as, like, work together.
Right. Right. Friendships, yeah. You're getting some sort of
a
efficiency
bit of
going
give and
on.
take
A big give and take, yeah. Which we definitely need to go into in another friendship episode. No illusion there. But I think it's good though. It's good to but I think that one thing that that makes me think of. It's like, okay, there's all these different types of friendships, there's all these different types of relationships, and it's like, what is the obviously we just talked about it, but what is the crux, the thing that we're supposed to do in all relationship, right? What is defines a good relationship, right?
You keep talking. I have a devotional. I don't know what it's called. We like read something and then you write a thing on it.
Oh, nice.
Kind of like
Yes,
a
yes.
devotional.
Yeah, we'll go with that.
Very
And
nice.
keep talking.
Okay,
I'm gonna look
okay.
that up.
No, you're
'cause I wrote
good.
this
You're
on
good.
Things.
But it makes me think like, okay, like I think that we start by loving God, right? Just like Saint Joseph did. Saint Joseph was like, and just like Adam in the Garden of Eden, love God before all else. Like love Him primarily, have a good relationship with the Lord, and through that, your relationship to others is going to flow. Like those around you, as long as they're not dragging you down, like to hell, like as long as they're not like your drinking buddies who are like, nothing wrong with drinking, by the way, like
Yes.
in moderation, but like as long as they're not the guys who are like leading
You
to
go out
sin,
with them to get plastered.
to get
all the
plastered all the exactly.
Yeah.
And like as long as they're not guys who are dragging you down, as whatever, then they are good, and they're your ministry, or you are supposed to love them, and they're supposed to love you, and by doing that, like bring you closer to God. And obviously, sometimes, like you said, it's a bit more of an like evangelization sort of thing, but also like other people are good in and of themselves, like, because they are made in God's image, even if they're not baptized, like they are good in and of themselves. They are worthy of love, of relationship. And while you can't be, in the truest sense of the word, true friends with someone who is not pursuing God like you are, someone who's not, well, baptized, right, in that sense, or equally yoked, shall we say, there is a certain amount of relationship that you can have with them just by loving them, just by loving them and willing their good.
Like a good symbol of it is like a cross.
Right.
Focus on God first, the arms come next,
Yes.
and together you hit the final heights.
Right, right.
And I think that's a very good symbol of that kind of relationship dynamic that
That
should
is
occur
really
with
good.
other people.
That is really good. Sorry, did you find what you
I
wanted?
did end up finding it. I have no order apparently, but I ended up finding it. This is actually a text I sent to you guys a while back. I was reading the daily readings, and the gospel was Matthew 5:43-48, and this is the love thy enemies one that probably everyone's heard multiple times if you're Catholic at least. But I had read this time and time again, and it always was the same thing. And then I was reading, it was actually the same edition of the Bible as the New American Bible, but there was different wording in it for some reason. I don't know why. But then just a different word, just like, wow, that's a new way that I've never thought about this before. But just for a little backstory, I'll read the original one and then read the next one and then go into what stood out. So what I normally read is, "But I say to you, love your enemies and pray for those who persecute you, that you may be children of your heavenly Father. For he makes the sun rise on the bad and the good, and the rain, and causes the rain to fall on the just and the unjust." And then not today, that's what it said here because I read it in the present, but it's past now. What I read was, "Love your enemies, pray for your persecutors. This will prove that you are the sons of your heavenly Father." And the reason it stood out is the word prove is like, I wrote it better before because I had time to think about what I was saying. So I'll just read what I wrote because that's better than trying to come up with it again. Don't need to reinvent the wheel. What stood out to me is that these two sections gosh darn, I can't read. What stood out to me is that these two sections that I did not write that. I'll skip that. I always thought that we should love everyone just because it is just, but we are supposed to love everyone to prove that we are children of God. The example of this is God is sending the sun and the rain on both the good and the bad. It is his ordinances that the pleasures and the pains of this world be ours, but he does everything for everyone out of love. He does not discriminate based on the character of that person. Therefore, it is our job to love all indiscriminately to prove that we are his children. So, it is not just, it's a goal, but it is intrinsically who we are to love and build relationships.
Yeah.
Wow.
And I think really St. Paul kind of builds on that kind of theme. I can't remember which letter it was, but where he says that, so like, Jesus says, like, no greater love has this than for one man to lay down his life for his friend. St. Paul takes that even a step further when talking about Christ with God proved his love for us, that while we were still sinners, or some translations say while we were still enemies, Christ died for us. So we are called to be imitators of God. Like St. Paul says, be an imitator as me as I am an imitator of Christ. So we are called to be imitators of Christ. And Christ came forth to show forth the face of the Father. And the Father proved his love for us, that while we were still sinners, Christ died for us. So we are called to prove our love for God, to prove our love for the Father, in the sense that it is used biblically, not just like as a, like, look, I'm Christian, I do this kind of thing. No, but like in the more biblical sense, which I'm not going to try to fully exegete that passage because I don't have that off the top of my head. But we are called to be imitators of Christ, and Christ died for others. So we are called to bring that kind of love, because the love of neighbor is inseparable from the love of God. So we are called to fully bring that into all of our relationships. And in the future, we can kind of like break down more specifically what those relationships were. I know we didn't get through like all of the kinds of friendship and relationships, but
we will.
That will come later.
Especially when we consider that Christ dwells in each person.
Yes.
So that's where this all comes together.
Yes.
Like Mother Teresa, I can't remember exactly the quote, but she talks about how like you can look into everyone and you can see Christ there. And that is the goal, is to be able to see Christ in everyone. Like what do you see when you see,
I think she
yes,
said.
like in different disguises. Like what do you see when you look at the man who's lying in like the gutters? What do you see when you look at the man who is like walking on the side of the road? What do you see when you look at the man whose life is broken and in tatters?
Who's bothering you?
The man who's bothering you,
or
yes.
causing you issues.
Do you see Christ? I think that's a really good Christian test of love. Can you look at others and see Christ? Can you look at others in love and even recognize if they're doing something wrong, if they are hurting you, if they're going out of their way to do these things, if they're doing things on a larger scale, smaller scale, whatever it is? Can you look at them and see Christ in them? Do you look at them and you just like feel angry for what they're doing? Do you look at them and you just like pity them because it's like, oh, like you're like going and doing a terrible thing? Or can you look at them in love and let love inform the rest of your like reactions to them? Because sometimes it is appropriate to feel anger towards what someone is doing.
Right.
St. Paul says like, if you are angry, let it be without sin. Do
Right.
not let the sun go down on your wrath.
Right.
Because anger is an emotion and it can be used for good or for bad.
Right.
But can you be angry without sin? Can you let love dictate, all right, is this something that I should be angry about? Can you let love dictate, you see someone who maybe they're doing something wrong, can you look at them and see that they're doing that out of a place of hurt?
Yeah.
Can you look at them and instead of going to anger, go to like sorrow and sadness and be like, how can I reach out to this person? Even if I have no idea who they are, what's one way that I can show love to them?
And make reparation
Exactly.
Yeah.
to God for that. You know?
How can I show
That's how we
forth the
become-
face of Christ to them?
And how we could be other Christs. Because God dwells within us.
Yes, indeed.
Dude, this like relationship and like love of others in relation, like this is so deep. We could have like a 10 show series on just this one definition. I love this so
Who
much.
knows? It might end up being more than we're planning.
It might end up being more than
But
we're planning. We're not.
we
planning.
shall see.
We shall see. But that we are running out of time, so we should probably wrap it up there. But
One thing.
Go ahead.
It's like real quick. It probably won't take. I don't know. I'll just say. I don't know. I think I heard it was Bishop Barron video, and for some reason this stuck out to me years later, and I think it was Mother Teresa of Calcutta said this. Someone asked her like, "Why do you do what you do?" or "What? How do you love someone?" or something. I don't know. It's something along those lines. But then either she stuck her hand out on the table, or their hand was on the table and she stuck her hands. But it's the purpose of love can be a word for each of your fingers, and it's "you did it unto me" or something. Or wait,
wow.
no, I
To me.
I can't remember the word.
It to me.
Yeah, but something I clearly can't count. But you get the gist. That's what she was said with better words and fingers. But better words. I don't know.
And to build off of that, to close
Right.
this out, one like practical thing for this, because we've talked a lot about like loving God.
Right.
What does that look like? So for that, I have a challenge, not just for myself. I've been trying to do this and failing miserably a lot of times, but for everyone in here and for everyone watching and listening, that the foundation of a relationship is time. Time and conversations.
Yes.
And conversations go two ways. And the way that we spend in conversation with Christ is through prayer. Because prayer, once you boil it fully down, is a conversation with Christ. That can take on many different forms, but it is ultimately a conversation with Christ. And the highest forms of prayer are sacrifices, which is where you are basically in communion with Christ, offering that sacrifice to him and receiving it from him. So the kind of like the challenge is, are you truly spending time with Christ? Are you actually making time to sacrifice things in your day to spend time with him? And if you aren't, can you? What can you do? What can you commit to? And if you are, there's the question of, can you do more? For some people, that's not really an option, because just like what they have going on, they have sacrificed things already. They can't really sacrifice more and still live within their vocation.
Right.
How can you be more intentional with that time? Do you have prayers that you already say? Do you already read scripture? Do you already do these different things? How can you enter more fully into it? Do you need to find a place where you can be more alone to be with God? Can you find a place where you can truly enter in and listen? Is what you do like talking to him the whole time? If so, do you spend time listening? Because prayer isn't a monologue.
Right.
Often we can turn prayer into a monologue. But do you have time to listen to Christ and to just receive from him?
Yeah.
And do you let the things that enter you, like, do you truly discern those about, like, is this from God? Is this something that he's asking me to, like receive from him? Or is this a distraction? And to just, like, kind of, like, try and recognize those things. And just truly enter into that so that you can be in a relationship with God. Because all other relationships flow from that one primary relationship, which is the ultimate end of man. To know, love, and serve God in this life. To be together with him forever in the next.
Amen, brother. That
Yeah,
is
well
put, beautiful, great. That's cameraman. Just gorgeous, like, ending right there. Yeah, guys, I think that's perfect. We're gonna have to do another episode on prayer in relation to God, actually, specifically, because that just piqued my interest. But thank you guys so much. This has been a wonderful conversation, and I am really looking forward to the next episodes in this series. I'm loving it so far, so it's whet my appetite. I want to say so much more, but we're running out of time. So Thank you guys so much for watching. Be sure to check out the next episodes coming for this particular series, and happy St. Valentine's Day. May God bless you in all your relationships. And now we'll close off with our podcast motto, which, join me, gents, is Confortae esto vir. Ciao. Bye.
We're going.